What if the greatest danger facing Iran right now is not the missiles flying toward it, but the battlefield it cannot see? For decades, the Islamic Republic built its entire survival strategy around one assumption. Any enemy powerful enough to attack Iran would eventually be forced to stop. Because Iran did not build its military to defeat the United States or Israel in a traditional war. It built something different. A system designed to make war too expensive. A network of missiles. A network of allies. A network of uncertainty. But what happens when an opponent decides not to fight the system? Because somewhere between the mountains of western Iran, the waters of the Persian Gulf, and the underground facilities hidden beneath the Iranian landscape, a different kind of battle is taking shape. A battle not only over territory, not only over weapons, but over whether Iran's entire method of deterrence can survive contact with a new era of warfare. And the center of this story is not a fighter jet, not a missile, not even a military organization. It is something much bigger. The Iranian military system itself. The question is simple. Can a strategy built for the wars of the past survive the battlefield of the future? For more than 40 years, Iran has operated under a very specific military philosophy. Do not match the enemy weapon for weapon. Match the enemy with complexity. If the United States has aircraft carriers, Iran develops anti-ship missiles. If Israel has advanced aircraft, Iran builds underground missile networks. If Western armies have superior conventional forces. The idea was not to win a traditional battlefield. The idea was to create so many possible consequences that no opponent would ever choose to attack. On a map, this strategy looks like a spider web. Iran sits at the center. Around it are multiple layers of influence. Lebanon, Syria, and the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Every line connects back to Tehran. Every connection creates pressure. The same network that gave Iran strategic reach also created strategic dependence. Because a system built around many external pieces can become fragile when those pieces begin to fail at the same time. For years, the world focused on Iran's weapons, the drones, the nuclear infrastructure. But the deeper question was always different. Could Iran keep all these pieces connected during a major conflict? Because modern warfare is not only about what weapons you own. It is about whether those weapons can still communicate, receive orders, and influence events when the battlefield becomes chaotic. A missile without information is just metal. A radar without communication is just a screen. A military without coordination is only a collection of isolated units. And that is where the current crisis becomes different. Because the pressure facing Tehran is not coming from one direction. It is coming from multiple directions at once. Look at the Iranian coastline. On a satellite image, the Persian Gulf appears calm, almost peaceful. But beneath that blue surface sits one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage connecting the Persian Gulf to global energy markets. Enormous amounts of oil and gas move through this corridor. For decades, Iran understood something very important. It did not need to control the entire region. It only needed the ability to threaten the flow through it. That threat became one of Tehran's strongest political weapons. A calculation. A message to the world. If Iran is threatened, the global economy feels the pressure. But here's the problem. A weapon based on fear only works if the world believes you can still use it. And that belief depends on something bigger than missiles. For decades, Iran invested heavily in making its military power difficult to destroy. The country studied what happened to other regional powers. It watched how precision air campaigns changed warfare. It watched how traditional armies struggled against technologically superior opponents. And Iran adapted. The result was a military architecture built around survival. Missile launchers were dispersed. Facilities moved underground. Command centers were protected. Weapons production was hidden. The objective was simple. Even if Iran was attacked, Iran would still be able to respond. But the part most people miss is this. A fortress does not remove vulnerability. It only changes where vulnerability exists. The deeper a military hides underground, the more it depends on everything above ground. Electricity, communications, transportation, command networks, human decision makers. The bunker is not the entire system. This is why the current campaign represents a different strategic challenge, because the battlefield is not only physical, it is systemic. A traditional military campaign asks, can you destroy enough enemy weapons? A modern strategic campaign asks, can you disrupt the enemy's ability to function? Those are completely different questions, and they lead to completely different targets. Imagine a command room inside Iran. Screens glowing, operators watching radar feeds, communications moving between bases, officers trying to understand what is happening across thousands of kilometers. The instinct of any military is to protect the weapons. But advanced warfare often attacks something else first. Because if a military cannot build a clear picture of the battlefield, it cannot make effective decisions. And without decisions, even advanced weapons become less valuable. The lesson here is, the first battlefield is often not where explosions happen. It is where decisions are made. This is why air defense has become one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. For years, Iran invested in layered protection, Russian designed systems, domestic radar networks, electronic warfare capabilities. The goal was to make Iranian airspace dangerous, to force enemy aircraft to think twice. But modern air warfare has changed. The question is no longer, can one radar detect one aircraft? The question is a dangerous misunderstanding. Can an entire defense network survive against an enemy that attacks the network itself? Inside a modern fifth-generation aircraft, the pilot does not see warfare the way pilots did decades ago. The cockpit is no longer just a place to fly. It is a battlefield information center. Sensors collect. Data moves between platforms. The aircraft is not simply trying to shoot down an enemy. It is trying to understand the entire battlefield faster than the enemy can. And this creates another contradiction. The most powerful weapon may not be the weapon that fires first. But Iran's challenge goes beyond the sky. It was built around time. The belief that Iran could survive long enough for pressure to weaken its opponents, that political divisions would appear, that economic costs would create hesitation, that international actors would demand negotiations. In other words, Iran's greatest weapon was patience. But what happens when the opponent refuses to wait? The western mountains of Iran reveal another part of this story. A region where geography has always complicated central control. A region where local identity, political grievances, and historical conflicts have existed for generations. For decades, Tehran managed these challenges through a familiar cycle. Contain. But the conditions around Iran have changed. The regime is no longer dealing with only internal opposition. It is facing pressure while simultaneously managing external military threats. And that creates the most dangerous problem for any government. Not one enemy, but too many problems arriving at the same time. The world sees the visible conflict, airstrikes, missiles, military movements, statements from governments. But the deeper conflict is harder to see. It is a struggle over whether Iran can maintain the system that has protected it since 1979. Because the real question is not simply, how many weapons does Iran still have? Can those weapons still create the strategic effect they were designed to create? And this leads to the biggest contradiction of all. Iran spent decades preparing for a war where survival itself would be victory. Because a country can keep its weapons and still lose its ability to shape events. A military can remain large and still become strategically isolated. A fortress can remain standing and still fail to protect what is inside. And this is where the story moves deeper, because everyone is watching the missiles. Everyone is watching the explosions. Everyone is watching the battlefield. But the real war may be happening somewhere else. And the next question is the one that changes everything. If Iran's military system was built around creating uncertainty for its enemies, what happens when Iran becomes the one facing uncertainty? Because weapons are only the visible layer of war. And the biggest mistake analysts make is assuming that destroying a weapon system automatically destroys the strategy behind it. A missile launcher is not just a machine. It is a decision. A radar station is not just electronics. It is confidence. A proxy network is not just fighters. It is political influence projected across borders. And that leads to the question that changes everything. What happens when a country loses not only its weapons, but the ability to make other countries fear using force against it? Because that is the real battlefield emerging inside Iran. Not the battlefield shown by satellite images. Not the battlefield measured by destroyed buildings. The battlefield of perception. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic built its survival strategy around one central idea. Iran did not need to defeat a stronger enemy. It only needed to make victory too expensive. A weaker military could still survive if it controlled escalation. If every strike against Iran created 5 new crises. If every missile launch created political pressure. If every attack on its territory risked destabilizing global energy markets. Iran's strategy was never simply about missiles. The missiles were the message. The message was, if you attack us. But now that equation is being challenged. Because the same systems designed to create uncertainty are being targeted by a force designed to remove uncertainty. And that changes the entire calculation. The lesson here is that modern warfare is not always about destroying the enemy's strongest weapon. Sometimes it is about destroying the belief that the weapon will work. Look at a map of the Middle East. A single line connects the Persian Gulf, Syria, Lebanon, and the Red Sea. For decades, Tehran built influence along that line. A network of partners. A network of weapons. A network of pressure points. The purpose was simple. A drone launched from Yemen. A militia attack in Iraq. A threat against shipping in the Gulf. Each action created distance between Tehran and the consequences. That was the genius of the strategy. And also its weakness. Because a network built for expansion can become vulnerable when every connection is attacked at the same time. The part most people miss is that Iran's military power was never one giant machine. It was a system of systems. Remove one piece. Remove several pieces simultaneously. The system begins to behave differently. The real question is, can Iran still coordinate fear? Inside military command centers, modern wars are increasingly fought through information. Not just bullets. Not just bombs. A commander needs to know, where are enemy forces? What can they launch? Which units are still connected? Which threats are real? Which threats are deception? A modern military can survive losing equipment. But surviving without a clear picture of the battlefield becomes much harder. Imagine a radar operator sitting in a dark command room. A signal appears. But nobody knows if it is real. The communication network is damaged. The command chain is uncertain. That moment of hesitation is where modern warfare is decided. Because the weapon is not always the missile. The weapon is the uncertainty created before the missile arrives. This is the invisible battlefield. And this is where technology changes strategy. The rise of fifth-generation aircraft. Artificial intelligence assisted intelligence systems. Cyber operations. And precision weapons has changed one fundamental rule of warfare. The battlefield is no longer defined by who owns the most weapons. It is increasingly defined by who can connect information faster. A fighter aircraft today is not just a fighter aircraft. It is a sensor, a communications node, a decision-making platform, a flying intelligence center. The same principle applies across the battlefield. A missile battery without information is weaker. A ship without intelligence is exposed. A command center without communication is isolated. The future military advantage belongs to the side that can turn information into decisions faster than the opponent. And that is why Iran's problem is larger than the loss of individual facilities. The deeper problem is adaptation. Can a military built around centralized control survive a battlefield where information moves faster than orders? But there is another battlefield developing. And this one is thousands of miles away. The global economy. On a computer screen in London, Singapore, or New York. Traders are not watching missile launches. They are watching risk. Because energy markets do not care only about how much oil exists. They care about whether oil can move. The Persian Gulf remains one of the most important energy corridors on Earth. Every tanker passing through the region carries more than fuel. It carries economic stability. A military confrontation near these waters creates pressure far beyond the battlefield. Insurance costs rise. Shipping routes change. Markets react. Governments calculate. A regional conflict becomes a global economic equation. This is why geography matters. A small piece of coastline can have strategic importance far beyond its size. A narrow waterway can influence decisions in distant capitals. A military operation can become an economic event. And an economic event can become a political crisis. And military bases. But the real battle is about strategic control. Who controls escalation? Who controls uncertainty? Who controls the choices available to the opponent? That is the transformation. The surface war is about weapons. The hidden war is about options. And this is where Iran faces its most difficult challenge. Because the Islamic Republic spent decades building ways to create pressure. But now it is facing an opponent trying to remove those pressure points one by one. The question is not simply, how many missiles does Iran still have? The better question is, how many strategic options does Iran still control? History shows that military systems rarely collapse because of one attack. They collapse when the assumptions behind them stop working. The Soviet Union did not fall because one tank was destroyed. The Maginot Line did not fail because the concrete was weak. Power structures fail when the world changes faster than they can adapt. Iran's military doctrine was designed for a different era. An era where regional influence could compensate for conventional weakness. An era where ambiguity created protection. An era where escalation could be controlled. But modern warfare is moving toward a different model. Persistent surveillance. Rapid precision strikes. Integrated intelligence. Economic pressure. The battlefield is becoming less about hiding power. And more about connecting power. So what happens next? That is where the uncertainty begins. Iran still has capabilities. It still has missiles. It still has geography. It still has political influence. And history has shown that states under pressure do not always collapse. Sometimes they adapt. Sometimes they become more dangerous. Sometimes they change strategy entirely. The biggest mistake would be assuming that losing one method of power means losing the desire to use power. The question is what comes after adaptation. Does Iran rebuild a different military strategy? Does it focus more heavily on asymmetric warfare? Does it attempt negotiation from a weaker position? Or does internal pressure reshape the political structure itself? Nobody knows. And that uncertainty is exactly why this moment matters. It is about every country watching this conflict. China, regional powers across the Middle East. Every military planner is studying the same question. Can advanced technology and precision warfare defeat a strategy built around endurance and disruption? Because if the answer is yes, then the lessons extend far beyond Tehran. They reach every country that relies on missiles, proxies, and economic pressure as a substitute for conventional superiority. It may belong to the side that can see faster and adapt faster. The question is no longer who has the largest military inventory. The real question is who can maintain strategic influence when their weapons, networks, and assumptions are all being challenged at the same time. Because modern wars are not only fought by destroying what the enemy has. So the question is, do you think future conflicts will be decided by the country with the most powerful weapons, or by the country with the most adaptable system?